Welcome everyone to Katalon and AWS Device Farm by Andrew Nixdorf on how to maximize test coverage with Katalon Studio, as well as minimizing costs with AWS Device Farm. So before we get started on the actual demo and presentation today, just some household items. Most of you probably joined via a meetup, so then you know basically who we are. The couple things that I did want to kind of mention is that we have been growing rapidly over the last 2 years. We are currently at about 725, maybe even a little bit more as of this morning, members, and those are not just in Chicago, but all across the United States, as well as last time we had a member from Spain joining, as well as Australia. So we are growing internationally. So this is really excited. We do have topics lined up for the rest of the year. We actually are playing with the idea of potentially doing a half-a-day convention sometime in the fall, but those plans are still outstanding. A quick word on our corporate sponsors. So Slalom Build is our corporate sponsor. Slalom Build is a consulting company, but they're a little bit unique in that they don't do like your regular management consulting or off-the-shelf products, but we actually building custom solutions for our clients. So we are all software development driven. Really quick, our organizers are David Tan, Karlin, Kappala, and myself, Sven Thirion. All right, so and now I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker for today, Andrew Nixdorf. He is a lead SDET working currently at Zymex, located in Reno, Nevada, and he's working on insurance solutions. I'm going to hand it over to Andrew so he can introduce himself and talk a little bit about himself before he gets started. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Sven. Yeah, so I mean, I've been in this testing realm for a little while, and there is some really cool stuff that I've learned along the way, and I was hoping to help share that information with some of you guys. So thanks for joining, and let me share my screen with you, and we'll get going. So basically what I'm talking about today is going to be Katalon and AWS, the why and the how. Really, the core foundation is always, what are we trying to solve here? And the answer is produce quality software. So with that in mind, basically, my approach has always been, how does the user experience the application, concentrating more so before it gets released to maybe your customer or the end client, whoever the end user is, right? So there's a bunch of factors that contribute to quality, obviously. If you have a mobile phone, maybe there's a different experience that you might have versus a website type of experience. Your interpretation of the company might be how well you get customer support, or if the app is intuitive to know that, hey, you need to talk to support here, or if you're on a runaround chase and it makes you frustrated, right? How do you feel after using the application? Really is what we're trying to get out of this, is a seamless user experience so that we give you the best experience on any device that you use, right? So how do we produce quality software? Obviously, we're going to test. That's what this whole conversation is about, is how we test before giving the product to the customer. And how do we provide that feedback to the developers making the product? And how do we provide feedback maybe to some integrations teams and analysts and other people that might be involved? And how do we automate that to do as much as possible, right? So complexity in testing is always a core concept that is difficult to get around. Sometimes when you're testing the end result, there might be so many different moving parts that make up the end product, right? There could be integrations with third-party services, whatever it might be. And then there might have to be certain things done in specific order, right? Role access and boundaries, who has access to what is a big thing. You don't want people to be able to access things that they shouldn't be able to access. And then obviously you have the complexity of what's actually running on the device, that sort of thing, is the differences in browsers, screen size, operating systems, geographical location. All of that leads to a customer experience. So this graph is really just a demonstration of, you know, how much complexity that there is in your software or your application will directly be impacted to how long it takes to deliver that software with confidence, right? And so the more complex, the longer it takes to deliver with confidence. So what we're trying to do here is ensure a reliable user experience with Katalon, right? And so the whole idea of Katalon is that it uses Selenium under the hood. So it's front-end web UI type testing. It also has support for API testing and many other types of, you know, could run down all the different types of testing they have, and we'll probably talk about a little bit more of that in later on. What I've tried to do here is create a secure infrastructure suitable for testing, right? We're designing test cases around a user story. We want to make sure that when there's a failure, that it shows up. And then we want to have multiple environments that we usually would test against, right? And so we might have a dev, staging, UAT, or production environment. Typically, you don't really ever want to test production. That is something that is a no-go. But you might want to run some sort of smoke test or sanity test that makes sure that you can access that site, that sort of thing. And you want to be able to test the same user story, right? You want to have the same type of experience across devices and environments, right? So what you experience in dev should happen in staging, should happen in UAT, which then happens in production. And as you move along those stages, you catch things, you fix them before it gets to production. So we want to create tests with purpose, be clear about their purpose and how it would relate to the end user, right? And so we're talking about a user story, typically, of what the user's trying to do. And when that fails, that conveys the meaning back to the person that gets the messages that there's a failure here. Where did it happen? How did it happen? How can I recreate that, right? And then you want to send a clear message, right? Because some of these messages might not be received by a developer, right? Some of them might get to a project manager or something like that, where the project manager, if the project manager has to go to a developer to ask what this is saying, you're probably not writing your tests well enough for the purpose that you're writing for, right? And then obviously don't try and do everything all at once. So at some point in your testing journey, you start to understand that waiting 8 hours for testing to complete is just unacceptable, right? And I've been there, and this is the reason that everybody scales, right? Is as you start testing maybe a certain project or for a certain company, maybe you're consulting, there's a lot of different aspects to this. You might build small, which is running locally on your local environment. And then as you build to scale, you want to test more. Well, then you need to usually build your infrastructure around that so that you can process things in parallel. And so what this is all about is parallel testing, right? And so one way that we do that is using a Selenium grid, right? Selenium grid is basically, this diagram is a small representation of how this works. It gets sent from the client to the Selenium hub. The Selenium hub then communicates with each node. So each one of these would be a server for a particular use case, right? So the client might be some sort of testing framework that you're using. For example, you could be using Circle CI, you could be using Travis, whatever that is, right? And that is what is going to end up kicking off your Selenium hub, which then communicates to your nodes, right? And so there's a lot of different solutions to doing this. And the question always comes up, build versus buy, right? Is it more cost effective for us to build this, support it, and then go out and find somebody that's knowledgeable in those areas? Or should we just buy somebody else's solution when we have a problem, they support it, right? So depending on your organization, you might have a different need for one versus the other, right? You might have somebody in your organization that's very savvy with this sort of thing, and they can build this and you can host it locally within your own organization. Cool, that's great. But what this talk is going to be focused towards is the second option of buying the grid. Basically, what we're doing is with Device Farm is we're buying their solution. So why AWS Device Farm, right? So it is the cheapest option out there behind running it on your own servers. You have unlimited parallel concurrent sessions, right? You're only billed for what you use. And you can avoid the cost of paying a developer to set up, maintain, and secure your grid, right? And it comes with built-in functionality where you can actually configure this to run in your own private VPC, which is a great function for somebody that's developing their own product in-house, and they don't want this to go out to the World Wide Web so that everybody can access their dev environment. They want to keep their dev environment isolated within their own VPC before it reaches production, which would then talk to the internet, right? So there are a couple Device Farm limitations that we need to talk about. Device Farm does not take a lot of desired capability. So if you're doing some really fancy stuff and passing some fancy desired capabilities into your web drivers, this is probably not the solution for you. If you need to test anything outside of Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge, this is probably not the solution for you. Lambda Test and Sauce Labs, Browser Stack, those providers, they actually do provide some of these older solutions, say some legacy type solutions for IE. So in the case that you had to test IE for the client's sake, say the client has to be on IE, you would probably, this isn't going to be the solution for you either. However, for the majority of the applications out there, testing on Chrome, testing on Firefox is probably good enough. Couple other limitations that you need to think about, this is specific to desktop browser testing, is that this feature is only available in US West 2. So that means that any conversations, or not conversations, but any calls out to the Device Farm grid has to be in the US West 2 region. Not all Selenium interfaces are supported. The PyTest Selenium package does not allow command execution URL. So that's another thing. And then using multiple windows, multiple sessions is not supported. So multiple tabs, yes. However, multiple windows, if you had to open up another browser or open up application window, or have multiple browser sessions, this is not supported either. So, all right, so we're almost going to get into some code here, and I would just need to quickly, briefly discuss infrastructure best practices and benefits. So basically what we're going to start with is your access to user groups and roles and policies that you need to be able to implement to keep your organization safe. You should be granting permissions based on an as-needed policy. Multiple AWS accounts is the equivalent to having multiple environments in the most secure fashion that Amazon or AWS recommends, right? Those are their best practices. Environments are designed to be isolated and controlled so that you can minimize potential bleed over from unwanted behavior. Say if your dev environment, if you had some sort of resources that were connected to your production environment and you didn't realize it, and somehow you produced or introduced some change to dev and it affected production, that doesn't happen when you use multiple AWS accounts typically, right? Unless you're talking to another component. But basically, that's one of the reasons that you would do this, is to separate out production from dev. So if you accidentally did something in dev, production's not going to be affected. So along with that, you can try it before you break it. you can plan for disaster recovery and intentionally break stuff. Now that one's a big one. I think that a lot of times you want to have a disaster recovery plan, and the difficulty in those types of disaster recovery plans are expecting the unexpected, right? So you have to produce those types of situations or scenarios to see how your application might behave. Okay. So I'm going to introduce the first repo that we're going to get into here, and this is going to be the AWS Kickstarter Pro. Basically, there's another repo that started out there that kickstarts a typical organization using two roles, just admin and user. Now, I've made some additions to this so that it's more like a professional organization. So that being said, this is just for demo purposes. Is anybody here going to be following along and be grabbing the code? I hope, maybe. I'm just trying to.
I'm trying to.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm just trying to assess how much time I need to spend on this repo, because this is just really more of a prerequisite to get to the Katalon stuff. Okay, so here are the links. Oops. There we go. There are the links to the two repos that I'm going to talk about. Before getting into those repos, you'll probably make sure you have an AWS free tier account, or just an account in general. And then you'll want to make sure that you have Terraform installed. So, yes, thank you.
I put the two links.
Thank you for putting that. Thanks, appreciate that. Okay. Does anyone still need me to leave this up, or is anyone still looking? No, you got it in the chat now, right? Okay. So, I have both of these projects open right now, and I wanted to start off with the Kickstarter. So what you should have here is this workshop Kickstarter directory right here. And really all you need to do is just cd into that directory. And then you're going to want to run. Let's just make sure that you have Terraform installed first. Okay, so be able to see that I have Terraform version 1.2.8 installed. And I've already run this Terraform, and I'm not going to rerun it because I want to show you guys more of the features of the Katalon side. So what I was going to say is all you need to do to get this going is first start off with Terraform init. I'm actually going to run init upgrade. Okay, and we'll run Terraform plan. Oh, so I apologize. I'm kind of I'm jumping ahead of myself right here. So I believe that what is happening here is I'm running this using an account that's already provisioned with some security pieces in there. So what you would have to do is get your root account. Now I'm going to pull up my root account here. Here we go, root account. Okay, and from here, we'll go to security credentials. Now, if I was going to keep this sort of thing, obviously, I'm going to create these keys just for a couple minutes, do what I got to do, and then I'm going to delete those keys. Because you don't want to do this in a typical scenario, but we need to do this to get things going, kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to open up and edit my credentials over here off screen, so you aren't going to see this. Okay, so now I have some credentials that have been set up with my default profile. So I'm going to come back down here and I have the AWS toolkit installed for IntelliJ. There's another toolkit for VS Code out there, but this is a really nice way of just being able to swap between profiles right here. And then I don't have to run a command that goes like this. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, I'm ready to set this up. It's telling me it's going to set up my NAT gateway, and it's going to set up my VPC, and I'm going to say yes, let's do it. Your first time, you'll have a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be applied for all the roles, policies, groups. And users. Does anyone have any questions up till now?
I was trying to follow along, and then AWS is like refusing to give me a token right now. So I'm just watching.
Now I can show you the other side of this code. And this is the module or the modules that are being used. Okay, so for this VPC, what it's doing is it is creating the VPC based on what's set up here in this module. So it's using the defaults. I haven't given it anything, so it's basically taking everything from default here, and it'll just stand up a basic VPC with I believe it's 4 private subnets, 4 public subnets, and yep, that's that. And here you could change whatever you wanted to call this, right? We could call this repo has been set up for multiple accounts. So that's the really cool thing, is that I haven't done this for multiple accounts, but if you were to use this in a professional organization, you could stand this up with your VPCs from one source in multiple accounts, and instead of having multiple resources for one environment versus the other, it keeps everything equal between the accounts, because it's one set of source that it uses for the modules. So let's go back into that command, and that should probably go up down here. Okay, so what we have here are the roles that have been updated, and here's the outputs right here. So if I go back into my if I go back here, now I am done. I can go back over to roles. You can see here are my custom roles that have been designed here from my user account, right? I have the users that are associated with these groups. Okay, now this is a secure setup here. So the way that this works is a DevOps engineer or a developer would probably primarily be assigned to somebody, right? And then from here, this person would have to, you would enable their console access, right? And so we'd go in here to security credentials, manage console access, and you enable it right here, and you can basically send them a message or an email saying, here's your temporary password, and it'll prompt them to reset their password when they log in. So once they log in, it's locked down. So let's give an example of this. I think this is really fancy. So before I get out of this account, I'm going to go delete my keys. Okay, so now the root user does not have keys associated with their account anymore, and there's less risk of having some malicious activity going on from those keys being exposed. So I'll sign out of there. Okay. I have another administrator account that I'm going to sign into here as an IAM user, and my organization is called Nixdorf. And here's my admin user. Now I use 1Pass. I love it because I can save all of the different accounts that I have, and it saves your one-time password stuff too. So, all right, now I have the administrator account. I'm going to go into my IAM dashboard. Okay, and from here I'll look at my users, and I'm gonna set up this DevOps account right here. So I'll go to DevOps, go to security credentials, and enable console access. Okay, and I will say auto generate password, and user must create a new password at next sign in. Right, so now I get their new password. Okay, there's their username to log in. So I'm going to log out. going to do the same thing, except this time I'm going to use that temporary password that I just set up. And I'm going to use an account that I have not set up before. All right, so there's that old password again. Okay. For my new password, I'm going to use my 1Password application. So I'm going to do this off screen. You guys aren't going to see this, but I'm going to create a new password here. And I'm going to take and set up a new account for this AWS user. And I set my password policy to be 32 characters or more. So it's quite long. Okay. Now I have logged in as this user. Now, my first time coming in, maybe it's a new employee or something like that. I would go take a look around, right? Oh, okay. I do not have access to do this, right? This is an initial stop that allows you to enforce your multi-factor authentication policy. So if I go into my security credentials, I have to go assign multi-factor authentication device. Okay. And I'm going to put this into my device manager over here. And then that's going to give me these MFA codes. Okay, so it has successfully set up the MFA device. Okay, so you'll still see that I don't have access. And it's like, well, DevOps should have access to the highest level of permissions. So what I have to do is I have to get a session, an MFA session, for it to be able to show that. So I have to sign out. And I have to log back in again. Okay, and let's see if it saved my new DevOps account with MFA. Boom, I'm in as that DevOps account. Now, if I go back to the page I was just on, I don't have that error anymore showing me that I can't access something, right? So at this time, now I can create the access keys for this user. So I'm going to create some access keys. I'm just going to say this is going to be DevOps access. Okay, I'm going to take these and put these into my role or into my config and credentials file for AWS. Is everybody familiar with what I mean by the config and credentials files?
I do.
Can you go over it real quick?
Yeah, so every user in using AWS as a developer, you have credentials file, which is where you store your keys. Now let's look up. So these are the docs, right, from AWS. Basically, here's the location of your credentials file. Here's the location of your config. Okay, so what I've just done over here was I created these two access keys and secret access keys. And so that's going to go and I'm going to plug it in right here, right? Now, instead of using the default profile, I'm going to give myself a DevOps profile. So that's what I'm working on right now. Now, one of the secure parts about this is that there's an additional part of these keys. I have to have these keys, and then I also need to take this identifier right here. This is my MFA arm. And if I go look at the README again, it is down here where it tells you that's how your profile should be set up right there, right? So I'm going to take this MFA arm like that. I'm putting this into my config. And then I'm also setting my region inside this config as well. Okay. All right, so doing this, I'll refresh my stuff over here. You can see that this was set with my root profile. It no longer works. That's great. So what I'm looking at now is this new profile that I just set up called DevOps. Now, if I did this correctly and I set my MFA arm, oh, okay, maybe it's not working right now. Oh, I think I have to add the other part, the role arm. Okay, so that's the other piece that I have to set here is role arm and the source profile. So source profile is going to be, for myself, it's Android Nixdorf. That's my organization. Profile. Role ARN. To the role that was created, right? And we were using, here's the role, and here's the ARN. Okay, yeah. I think I have too many profiles over here. I think I'm mixing up profile stuff. That's what's happening. Okay, so my key things with WPG. Okay, let's try this one last time. So this. I wonder if I just have too many profiles in here and it's not picking it up through the tool. Get rid of some. Well, you know what, I am having some technical difficulties getting that role to work, but that's the scenario that I need to kind of debug this MFA stuff, but I'm going to use another role to continue on this. So I hope that this doesn't derail us too much, but basically that's the setup for setting up a role or a user within your database. And what that'll give us is these users with these active keys. And this is actually very interesting. It looks like all of these are using the same access key. I don't know why that is, but so this is going to get us to the next spot. So let's get into Katalon finally, and let's start talking about how that works with AWS. So why did I choose Katalon? Why Selenium? Basically, we're testing a very large application here. It allows data-driven testing. I don't use the Appium for mobile testing, but I know a lot of people are driven to use this framework for that specific purpose. Katalon Studio also built in a lot of support for visual testing into their product, and they have their own DevOps type dashboard that you can monitor your types of test results on their type of dashboard. So if you're not wanting to set up your own dashboard or whatever, you can use their solution for that as well. It's easy to use getting going. It's easy to train people. You can get results with having very little knowledge or information about the tool. It allows custom integrations with any Java package. And the automated testing projects that I've started up with Katalon Studio have been significantly faster than trying to create a solution from scratch. It's allowed us to give the feedback to the customer in a more direct fashion for the customer. The customers understand it and they get better, faster feedback. And the sessions seem to mock user interaction a little more accurately than some other test frameworks that I've used. Cypress is a great tool. I'm not dogging it all. I love Cypress. It just has its own niche for its own use application. Primarily, I think of Katalon Studio being more of a black box type testing approach where you don't have access to the code. You're just testing the end product. You're testing the integrations. You're testing your end product, right? It might be your end product, might be your API. Maybe it might be the application front end. Cypress tries to get through through testing as fast as possible, and it probably processes, because everything's running async, it processes tests quicker, faster. So Selenium and Katalon, they just have different use cases, right? You can send a Selenium session to an analyst or to just a business interest, somebody that's interested in what the test is doing, and they can watch the test, and it runs in a quick fashion where it runs as fast as it can by using clicks and that sort of stuff. However, it's not running the backend async calls that Cypress does. So if you haven't already, now would be a great time to download Studio, Katalon Studio standalone edition. And the standalone edition will take you to, where's my link at? Katalon.com/download. And here is the standalone edition. Okay. And this actually works best for my solution, for our solution, the company solution. And let me explain why. The platform edition is great if you're getting into things. Maybe you don't have somebody that's very technical, but you would like to start introducing some sort of testing that you can build into, use one Selenium grid browser session. There's very limited functionality when you start interacting with like a Selenium grid, but it does have a solution kind of built out of the box. You don't have to do any configurations. You just click and use. And then I believe that they try and sell you on their solutions along the way. You use their dashboard, you use their video recorders, whatever it might be, their Selenium grid. So they're trying to put together an end-to-end solution for the people that are not technically inclined, right? The runtime engine is a must-have also if you're running this within some sort of CI/CD pipeline. We use our runtime engine, right? So we've kind of scaled depending on the needs of our testing. We buy licenses based on the workload that we're trying to process, right? And so your Katalon Studio is really like the beginning of everything. It's what the developers use to create the tests. Once you have that downloaded, there is one caveat that's happening right now with Mac OS users. If you have one of the old Intel processors and you've upgraded to Ventura, there's a critical bug out there that makes the application crash. So as much as I love Katalon Studio, they're also having a technical issue right now that is very frustrating. So for me to be able to launch this application, it's kind of a hassle. Have to go into, basically you download their package, right? So I downloaded this package here, I installed it, right? And then it will crash on you. So then they give you this script that you have to run, which allows it to bypass some low-level bug that they have with compatibility issues that they're saying is coming from Apple. So Katalon's pointing the finger at Apple, saying Apple needs to fix this for us to put out a patch. Anyways, so for now, this is how I launched the application. Do we have any other Mac users in here, or is everybody on Windows?
I'm a recent Mac user. I used to be always on Windows, but except in structure, as David knows.
So if you're on Windows, you should not have any of these problems. Or if you're even on one of the new Apples using M1 chips, you will not have these problems. So
Sounds like another reason I should just upgrade my Intel Mac to the new M1s.
yeah, as far as this issue, it seems to be that nobody was thinking about backwards compatibility here, because it's kind of funny from a software testing company for them to have an issue like this and they didn't test it, like how did this get by them? Anyway, so what I have here is Katalon Studio opened up, and I also have it open in IntelliJ. Okay, so over here in IntelliJ, I got this. I have these folders that are my projects, okay? And inside, so my AWS services directory here, if anybody else has the code open, you can kind of dig through this and browse through this. But inside the AWS services directory here, this is kind of where I'm using the AWS SDK to build my functionality that I need, right? And so I import my libraries that I need. And in this one, actually, it looks like I'm just running all of my commands through command line. Okay. A couple of reasons that I've done this is that doing and setting up the authentication through the SDK seemed to be more difficult than just setting up an AWS CLI command that then runs and gives me everything I need. And I can use that using different profiles. So as a parameter here, I can use a different profile and talk to a different profile for a completely different environment. So this is the keyword. This is the function for the keyword that I've built that I'm going to discuss today. And what this does is it interacts with AWS Device Farm. And one of the interesting features of Device Farm is that it doesn't give you a static URL for you to use continuously. So when you're using Katalon Studio, let me show you how this is configured in their solution here. So I have a project, right? And in this case, this is my keywords project. This is what I'm using to build my AWS keywords. And inside every project, you have settings, right? And inside your desired capabilities, you have a desired capability for your remote URL, right? And so I could set up some sort of remote URL for a general URL. I can go into my account here, and I'm going to search for Device Farm. Okay. And you'll have to do this logged in as a user with escalated permissions. So either the DevOps account or the DevOps admin account should work. And you'll go to your desktop browser testing projects. And I have one right here set up for, let's say, Reddit, but I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call this one Chat GPT. Okay. And I'm going to leave this VPC information out right now because I want this to talk to the internet. So this is going to be my grid for running tests. Okay, and if I was creating an application and I had my resources locally within a VPC, a private VPC, didn't reach the internet, I could select that here, which is this is the VPC that was set up through the Terraform. And I could select, I think you need to have 2 or more subnets. And so you would set up your public subnets or private subnets, whatever you're trying to reach, right? And give it a security group. So that's how you would keep it secure within your own infrastructure. For right now, we're just talking to the internet, so there's no need to put that on its own private VPC. Okay, so now I have this project ARN, and you can see it gives me that name right there. And if I go into the project here, you'll see that here is my URL. Right, so this is my general URL for the Selenium grid. So getting back to here in Katalon Studio, I could put this in here just for informational reasons. This will not actually connect here, and let me explain why. But I'm going to do that in just a second. Then normally to connect to your Selenium grid, this is where you would pass in your desired capabilities, right? And so I could set up whatever desired capabilities I wanted to send them, and that would tell the browser how to run, right? There's a ton of desired capabilities out there. This talk isn't really going to go into many of them other than just saying that it's used to fine tune your testing. So I can apply and close this, right? Now with Lambda Test, Browser Stack, or Sauce Labs, they give you a URL that does not change, right? However, for Device Farm, that URL consistently changes, and it also has a session timeout, right? So in here, I can look at my project settings. Maybe it's not in there, but there is in your desired capabilities that we're passing to Device Farm, we give it a session timeout. So I've set this up in AWS keywords here. That's the project that's open in Katalon Studio. Okay. And inside these profiles, you'll see these are basically the environment variables for global variables for the test, right? So each test, you can swap out these values and it will know how to interpret how to run the test, okay? So inside here, it has a max timeout session. That is your max timeout session for the Selenium grid. So I think that this was set to 3 hours. So if something happened in your tests, if your tests in one instance took more than 3 hours to run and it was open and just dead in the water, nothing's happening, it's just out there, it will close it after 3 hours if some critical issue happened throughout the test. So let's go into a little bit about why I set these values here as I set them. I tried to keep everything as secure as possible. So that being said, built-in Katalon Studio encrypts this password right here. So this is built-in functionality from Katalon Studio that allows them to encrypt the password, and you can use that password by using their keyword that then unencrypts it. Sven, you had a question?
Yes, so you were talking about the timeout. The need for this timeout, is that because you are being billed for what you use, and even though the test is no longer running, you're still being billed for it? Or is the timeout just arbitrary, just because there's no need to keep it longer than 3 hours?
Yeah, the timeout is so even though I have the timeout at 3 hours, the session does not stay open for 3 hours. The session only stays open as long as it needs to be open. Right, so as soon as your testing is done, it will close the session. However, if for some reason you had a critical failure and the session was not closing because your test could not complete, it didn't reach the end, then it would time out after 3 hours and kill that instance or the access to that instance, right? So if we go look at the keywords that I've built here, I have, okay, let's go into, so I built a lot of these as functions that have been jarred and put into this project. So I'm going to open up IntelliJ, and under my AWS services project here, I have all of my heavy lifting for the AWS keywords is being done in here. Okay, so inside this AWS utils class, this is where the get grid function happens, this is where it retrieves AWS secrets. Okay, so this is the magic that's happening behind the scenes is when it's retrieving secrets. Okay, so what it needs is your AWS profile, your region, your secret name, and your secret key. And what it will return is your secret value. Right now, I just have this open with the debugger just so that we can see this. In reality, when this is running, obviously this would be disabled and you wouldn't actually see this value. So when I go back to my, maybe I should run these side by side. Let's try that. Okay, so now when I go look at my profile, you'll see that what it's looking for here is my AWS profile. This is going to align with the profile that I've set up in my AWS credentials file. And it's going to look for the AWS region. It's my default region. And of course, this is going to be US West 2 because that's the only region that's supported right now. And then I have a device farm name and a device farm ARM. Now these are this is the secret name and this is the secret key. Okay. And if I was to go look at that in my AWS console, here's my secrets manager. You'll see that I have a secret here called Reddit/web, right? And then inside here, this is where my secret values are going to be. And you'll see that for my secret key, I have Reddit-DeviceFarm ARN, which then gives me the ARN of the grid that it's connecting to. Okay, and so doing it this way is secure because I don't have that ARN number put directly in the code right here, right? So rule of thumb is if you have secrets, make sure that they don't ever get committed to code. So anyways, that is the magic that's happening here, is what it will be doing is looking for your secret, and then it goes and decodes your secret and grabs the secret value. And then from that secret value, it uses, well, I kind of scan this one here, but it will run this CLI command right here. And you can see that it uses that secret that has then been translated. This is the actual value of the ARN that's coming back. And then it takes the max timeout sessions and it returns back your grid URL right here. So I built, some unit tests that just go along with this. So as I'm going through my core logic here, I have my AWS services Gradle project right here. What I would do is run this assemble command. The assemble command will then build this into a jar file, right, which is packaged up. And if I run the build, it's going to run these tests that are in here. What it's trying to do here is it's trying to pass in the values that I have outlined, the same values that I have outlined in my profile. And what it should do is return the grid URL. So my test's passing, right? It's also working with the retrieve secret part. That's the first part of this create grid piece. So now I have this passing and I have an artifact that I can use in another folder, in another project, right? So under libs, you'll see that I have this jar file right here. So I would then take this jar file. I would then put that into my Katalon project, and I'm going to put it over here into my drivers directory. So if I had multiple projects, right, and I needed to get that AWS functionality into those projects, The professional way to do this would be to go put it up onto a package repository, have a pipeline for that package repository, and then within your project, you would go to your Gradle build, right? And then you would put that resource that you're trying to pull. So this AWS services, it would, if I had my own repo, my own project package repo, I would put in a line of code like this. Now this is Gradle for anybody that hasn't used Gradle. And it would be something like my organization. And then it would be the name of the package, which is going to be what I just so anyways, it would be something like what is it? AWS services. And I would have a version associated with that, which would be 0.1, right? And so if I put that in as a resource like this, when I run a built-in another plugin that Katalon has supplied, where it allows you to build all of your resources and your dependencies directly from this Katalon copy dependencies Gradle command. So Katalon copy dependencies will go grab from the version in the package from the repository that it's looking after, right? So these are all hosted up on Maven. And it will return them and take the jar files and put them into a drivers directory like this. And it generates out all of these generated jar files. And it keeps these types of dependencies out of your code base. But for demonstration purposes, I'm not doing this piece right here. I'm just taking the jar file and putting it right into my drivers directory. And then as I start using my project, I can open up a test. And the test will automatically kind of give you their view. This is like how you would look at, using their keywords and anything that is built in. What we're doing here is building a custom keyword, right? And so here are my custom keywords that I have available. You can see these are the keywords that I've built within this application, within this project. Right, and so then I can interact with any one of these keywords at any certain time in any test, right? And what that gets translated over to is here's the script. As you look at the script, it would show you something like this, right? And then if I also wanted to just interact with the core library itself, there's no opening this test. There we go. Here's one. If I want to interact directly with the code in Groovy, right now this is a Groovy file, I can do that and I can just import my libraries. And you can see that's exactly what I've done here. Is I have this is the library that I just created in my AWS services jar. Okay, and then from there, I can start working on my keywords, like my listener keywords. Acting funky. Okay. And then what I have is the keyword that I've created. Okay, so now from here in my keyword, what I'm doing is I'm running this in a test listener. So in my test listener, the way that the test listeners happen is you have these before test suite event, before test case event, after test case event, and after test suite event, right? So when I start my test, the first thing I want to do is start all of the grid stuff, right? And I don't want to have to repeat all this code in all of my projects, right? The whole goal here is to minimize what you're copying and pasting and the repetition of these types of functions. So I built in this initialized web UI keyword so that I can then in my other projects follow the same logic in every single project that I use. So in here, you'll see that I have the global variables that it's taking, and it is retrieving the secrets, retrieving the ARN secret from these values, and then it uses that ARN secret in the get grid call. Okay. Now, if it's a remote driver, this is a keyword that comes built in from Driver Factory. This tells you if it's actually running Selenium or if it's just running a local web driver on your machine, right? So if it's running Selenium, it will then know, okay, I have to connect to a Selenium grid, right? And so it goes and gets that grid URL and it starts passing these desired capabilities to the grid. Okay, so that's where we get our browser version, max duration, so on and so forth, right? You can pass it Chrome, it will start up your Chrome options. You can pass it Firefox, it'll start up Firefox options. And then it starts with your URL. And this part right here, this line of code right here is where all the magic happens. This will hijack a remote driver session. And instead of running the session that Katalon starts with, right? It says, oh, I got a session. I'm gonna use this session, right? We're actually going to say, nope, we don't want to use that session that you started up. We want to use this other session that we're talking to with this remote web driver over here with Amazon's or AWS's grid, right? And so that's how it hijacks your Selenium session and then transports that over to the device farm grid. Okay, so in running this keyword test, you'll kind of see what's happening. So first thing it's going to do is these are all test cases. So remember, each one of these test cases runs on one of those listener events. So we have the before test suite, before test case happens before every single test case, and after test case happens after every single test case, and then after test suite happens after all of the test suite stuff. So as I start here, I'm going to open up the browser, and to open up the browser, let's look at that test. It's using my keyword, open browser, keywords here. And it's opening the wrong file for me. All right, here is the logic behind the open browser. What it's doing here is it's saying, okay, I got a remote driver type. Obviously we don't want to open a browser if there's been some sort of error that already happened, right? And then it opens, if you do not use a remote driver, it opens your browser. So if I ran one of these tests over here I could run it with Chrome, Firefox, and it would run directly on my computer using that functionality. If it is a remote driver, then it will go through this section right here with the remote driver, and it doesn't have to open it because it's already opened from the previous section. Right? When it started the remote session, it opens the website. Okay, so let's run these keywords. To do this, let's run first. I'm going to run the Chrome profile, and it'll run these tests by opening my Chrome driver here on my computer. Okay, and this is how it always defaults right here, is it'll default to showing you its log viewer. Oh, I use chatgpt.com. Right, so that's an interesting one. Let's not use chatgpt.com. Is it openai.com? Okay, so I've made that change again in my profile, and let's go back over to test keywords, and it's still passed, right? All it's doing is it's just opening this browser. It creates the remote database. It connects to a remote database, and it does. I have this browser bearer token test disabled right now, but this, I know that this works. You just have to have an active Cognito pool to interact with. And then it goes and interacts with the device farm to get the grid URL. So let's run this again on Firefox. See how that works. And if I go look at my console, I can see what's happening a little bit more low level. This is how I prefer to see it. And over here, I have my WebDriver that just popped out. See, so it's getting the secret, retrieving the ARN. It's going and getting that grid URL, and success. You can see we have our grid URL. So if you go check this out, this key gets generated, right? And this is good for 3 hours. So if I wanted to, I could go back into my project settings, and I could set this up under my remote settings here. And without the plugin being available, if I didn't have that plugin available, I could still use this endpoint right here. And I would have to pass it those other desired capabilities with the required ones, max session timeout, blah, 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 or whatever it might be. And then from there, I could use this connection that would then go to that remote connection right here, right? So this runs the same test suite. It's just going to run it on a remote session now, so it's not going to pop up a browser for me here locally. So again, a little bit of what's happening under the hood here. It's going and it is getting the connection to the URL grid, the URL for the grid, and it's hijacking the remote driver session. And then it's waiting to get back all of the response from the grid to tell it, here's the details of what you're running with. So you can see this is what I was talking about by the details coming back from Selenium grid, but this shows you the desired capabilities that that grid is running with. And you can't tweak it. So. All right, so I have a successful test here. It ran against the grid, right? And now what I should have is I'll have an HTML report that's generated under my reports directory. And this will give me the time at which it ran. You can see 55 is it's gonna be this one right here. And I like to open the containing folder. And then in here, you'll see that it gives me all of the files that make up the details behind execution logs and blah, blah, blah. And then you have your HTML report. And here's the HTML report that goes over all the steps that were done in that test. If I wanted to convey some sort of message to whoever's getting the results, I would put my comments in here to see each part of the test along the way of what's happening, right? So that somebody could get a screenshot. You can add in parts of your test where you can kind of monitor it as your test goes, where you're just giving little snippets of screenshots and it'll put them into the step of, where it's at in that step. And then if you go in here and look at well, I think that I do not actually have it in here, but you can put in here as a comment, you can put in the grid using the session. You basically take the URL that we got to begin communicating with the device grid. Okay, so using this URL right here, you can put this into your comments in that report. And then behind that would go the session number of whatever ran, right? So for Reddit, have this session ID. So here's logs session ID. So you could put this into your comments, and then somebody could, from that report, directly be linked back to this video. And then this video would show the test actually running. And it, again, behind the scenes, it's doing all of the other AWS stuff here. So there's not much to this video, but that's how it all ties together. So now I have this keyword, right? And keyword looks like it's working the way that I want it to. It's opening the browser, it's doing what I need to do. Now I can use this keyword in another project. Okay, so is everybody following right now? I know that it's a lot of information all coming down at the same time. So please let me know if you have any questions. So for creating a keyword plugin, I'm going to close Katalon Studio. I'm going to be in my AWS Keywords Gradle project. Under tasks, I have other, and under other, I have Katalon plugin package. So if I run Katalon plugin package, this task takes a little bit of time. It's kind of a long running task, but what you'll get is under your build directory, under libs, Here's your keywords jar, and this will auto increment as this goes. So there's a lot of effort that went into just getting to this part or to this piece right here too. The jar file for the plugins and everything gets packaged up together based on the dependency tree, basically. So it tries to build everything into this jar file here. Now the pieces that it won't have are going to be the dependencies that I do not have in my Gradle file, right? And so the dependencies, this jar file will not contain any of the dependencies that I have in my AWS services package. So I have to use both of those packages in, say, a new project, right? So under drivers, this is a new project. I'm going to start trying to test ChatGPT, right? So I would take my keywords, I take this jar file, and I'm going to copy it into my drivers directory here. Okay, and then under AWS services, I had AWS services jar. And I'm also going to drop that into drivers. Okay, now when I go into Katalon Studio and I open up that new project, okay, so this should be opening this new project here. Open old project still. Sorry guys, I have a lot of stuff open on my computer, it seems like. Now this is a new project, right? And you'll see that it's not going to have all of those global variables that I need. So the first thing that I would do there is I'm just going to copy over some of my global variables through copying over a profile. So I go to keywords, let's look at the profiles I was using, and I'm going to copy all of these. I'll just drop them in here. Okay, so and over here, I'm just going to refresh this project. Okay, now you can see I have my profiles. And I could write test case. We'll just create a new test case. I'm going to call it open browser. And in open browser, I'm going to add a custom keyword. And I'm going to use, oh, maybe I didn't get my keyword. Oh, I apologize. I dropped it in the wrong directory. Okay, so I need to put the keywords into the plugins directory. So this services jar will still stay there, but I need to take this guy. And keywords guy needs to go here. Okay. Now, okay. So here's my open browser keyword. So I'm going to just try and run this test case. And first I want to run it with a local browser here. All right, so it's having some build path errors. So let's close this down and let's go look at what's going on. So I have this project, and then it's probably getting garbled up because it doesn't have project file. So it needs a project file to know what to do. I think that might accidentally die. Okay, so let's try opening it again. All right, so looks like I don't have any errors. I think it actually instantiated correctly this time. So let's see what's going on. Test cases main, I got open browser right here. Make sure it's good. Okay, so now it's recognizing my keywords. You can see all my keywords are in here. I also have this keywords initialized web UI. I'm gonna just put that out here, and let me tell you what. I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna put this into my listener. So now in my test listener, I'm gonna call this a for test suite. Doesn't have to be a sample. Let's do AWS for test suite. And I'm going to call that, and I'm going to pass it the test suite context. Now, in my open browser, it's going to call that custom keyword, and it should also call my custom keyword to initialize the web UI and hijack the remote driver session. So without me having to do any remote driver inputs, I can now run a test suite, and it will run through the test listener. So I'm going to take my test suite and let's create a new test suite. Okay, and in here I'll add my open browser test case. Right. And now from here, I can run using any one of these profiles, and I can go run it on remote. What you'll see is I don't have any settings set up for my remote connection. You can see it's trying to, from default settings that are put out there, the remote connection set to localhost 4444, right? That is the Selenium grid default if you were to run your own Selenium grid. That was a weird error. Okay, so now it's erroring on one of my, it's trying to create its first database connection here. And I forgot that I did not get my JDBC driver. So for me to not get this error, okay, what I have to do is I have to go into my Gradle stuff. And I'm going to open AWS keywords under tasks, other. You'll see Katalon copy dependencies is right here. Oh wait, ChatGPT. So you'll see that it is not going to be in the ChatGPT stuff, and that is because I need to update my Gradle scripts. So I can take what I have in my keywords, take the same build.gradle file, and drop one in here. Also needs to be called build.gradle. And what I really care about is grabbing these dependencies. This was the one that it was saying that it couldn't find. So I don't need some of the stuff I don't need to be able to package. This isn't going to package a plugin, and I don't need to update the plugins. I don't need to delete any previous plugins. I don't need to increment version. Okay, so now to grab these extra libraries, I'll resync my Gradle build. If it resyncs correctly, all this stuff should pop up in white. Let's see, it's configuring Gradle model. Boom. Okay, so now I don't have any errors. It looks good. It's going to pick up my Gradle configuration. And if I go down to ChatGPT, you'll see I have all these other build options now. So now I would go Katalon copy dependencies. Okay. And then here I would go project, refresh. And then we should be able to run this. Okay, I'm gonna do this instead. I'm gonna verify that ChatGPT and your drivers, you should see all of these. So they're there. You can see here's my MySQL connector jar. So even though I tried to refresh my project, I think I need to actually reopen it. So I just go to open project, reopen it. Okay, I'll reopen my test suite. What the heck? I don't know what's going on here. Sorry, guys. It seems like something's gotten corrupted here. Of course. But as what I'm trying to get to here is these remote sessions will run with just plugging in your new keyword plugin. All you need to do is just run that initialize piece and the build open open browser keyword, and it'll do all the hard work for you. And I would have to put in one other piece in my test listener to finish it up. Something like that. And what that would do is that would then destroy the session with the remote driver, and it should give you your sessions all over in Device Farm. So I'm pretty much at the end of my presentation here. Did anybody have any questions about anything that I've gone over, or let's see here.
Not right away. It was a lot, but luckily we did record it, so I'm gonna definitely have to watch it again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know it was a big topic, and so I know that it's a little bit more than just here's Katalon Studio from a beginner perspective. I really tried to kind of gear this one a little bit more towards like the professional side. So I know it was probably a lot for some attendees, but I hope that, you know, looking at the browser or at the repo that I put together, I hope like some people can kind of piece together all of the different components that are in Katalon Studio. There are lots of components, and I'm not saying any of this is easy, especially when you start getting into your cloud infrastructure and all of that sort of stuff. So thanks for following along with me, guys. I know that it's been kind of a whirlwind rush, and it kind of didn't even work at the end.
I think this was amazing. I mean, there's a lot of useful information out there, and the repo, there's a lot of stuff that we can just take and run with it or tweak it and use it within our own projects. So this has been very helpful.
Thanks, Sven.
Yeah.
Question, I guess. While the tests are running, then are you able to view those devices themselves? You need to watch them.
Unfortunately not. You have to wait until the session's done before you can view it.
Okay.
I know. And I've used other products too. I've used like Lambda tests, And Lambda test does allow that. So that is kind of another feature that's nice on their side, is that you can actually watch the test as it's running and not have to wait till the end.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, because I've had many cases. It's like I kick off the test and then I want to watch it just to make sure they actually did the basics, like log in, instead of discovering 2 hours later that it didn't do any of it.
Yeah. So, Suresh, I haven't really heard anything from you. I know, thanks for sticking around till the very end. Was this informational for you? Did you gain anything out of this?
Yes, absolutely, mate. And yeah, I just joined because I haven't used Katalon Studio before. Had some, or like I had my previous roles and stuff, like when I was looking at it, you have to wait until the end of the execution. So these were like limitations. So I just really wanted to like gather some more insights on someone who has extensively used it and implemented in an organization. So I just wanted to see, and I haven't used device forms as well. I've set up local Selenium grids or via the Docker. So I just really wanted to like understand the bridge between Katalon and device form. And yeah, at some point, like I couldn't like follow it up because it was too fast. But thankfully, like Sven recorded it. So I'm going to like go to the GitHub repository, and I'm in bench as well now. So it's a good time for me to like go and check on it. So thanks very much for all the things that you've shared, man.
Yeah, happy to have done that. One of the things that has been extremely useful for us is that when we did come to front-end load testing, we were able to do that using this type of device grid, because it didn't limit us on our number of concurrent sessions. So we were running into a scenario where the client wanted to have 200 concurrent sessions, and they also wanted to know, how does the front end perform behind those 200 concurrent sessions? So instead of using a tool like Artillery or JMeter that's just measuring back-end API calls, we use this to actually show how much lag it creates on the front end to wait for those types of responses. So that was really helpful for us to be able to run 100 users at the same time. And we found a lot of issues in our own application during that type of load testing, that front end load testing.
So would you then go about by adding that use case or test case 100 times then in your suite, and then you start running the suite and it runs on 100 different devices then? Or
yeah, let me show you. So I created a test suite. Let's see if it opens, right? Because it was saying it can't even open it. I don't know what's going on here. And like I said, I think that there's some buggy stuff that happened with this latest update to Katalon Studio. But basically, if you have a test suite collection, and in your test suite collection, I can add multiple test suites, right? And so I could have this one in there, and then I would have this run in parallel. I would have 100 entries here, all running that same test suite. And then I would also configure them to run against maybe all remote, maybe a couple different profiles running. And then I could just, I could run this. You can see, you can set your max concurrent instances right here.
oh,
I'd set that to 100. And then you can tell it how much delay between instances, because sometimes your application might not even be ready for this. Maybe you need to ramp it up, right? And so this is your ramp up period. So I think I was using like a 2-second ramp up period during that. And then you would just go, and obviously I didn't click through this 100 times. What I did was I set up a couple of these, right? Like this. And then I would go in and save it. And then I'd go into my code. And under that project, you have test suites right here. And you'll see that here's the collection that I just created, and everything is in XML format, right? And so I would just take this. yeah, kind of something like this. And just
When you have 100 tests and you have 20 devices, does it break up the 100 tests over those 20 devices in the beginning, or will it automatically adjust if some test takes longer and there's a few of these devices that are done? Will it then be distribute those tests to those devices, or how does it distribute the tests?
So
The reason I'm asking
as you're
yeah.
so maybe I'm just not understanding the question correctly, but
Okay.
so as I have 100 tests here, right? I have a different profile for every single device, right? So if I had to run different phones or something like that, I would set up a profile for that phone, or maybe a different geographical location or whatever it might be, right? And then maybe I have to reopen this project again. Trying to get to it as fast as I can here to show you. It's weird, it doesn't even show the collection that I just put in there. There's something going on. It's probably maybe my project file or something. I don't know what's going on here, but this is all new buggy stuff to me. I don't know what's going on, but you'll see every single profile you have, right, is going to just have its own session, right? And so all you have to do is just send it all to the same URL endpoint, and it does all of the tricky stuff for you.
Okay.
So there's no infrastructure that you have to manage in any sort of Selenium fashion. You don't have to scale up. You don't have to auto scale anything. You can completely just leave it all up to them. But as I mentioned, that grid URL is only good for 3 hours. So I'm going to try and work on getting this. I got to figure out exactly what's going on here. I'm going to push up this, the code changes that I made right here. And you guys are obviously welcome to play around with this on your own free time. And you know, I'm always open for feedback. So thanks again for joining me.
Thanks, Andrew. There was a lot of information and very useful. So I'm really glad that you did this.
Thanks, Sven. Appreciate that. Cool. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to get going. And yeah, thanks again for coming. And I hope that maybe you guys can play around with it. Might be useful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
And I didn't even really touch on the visual testing side of things, but I know that it's a previous conversation that we had about the visual testing, but this project was created with some of those visual testing components in there. So if you open it up, you can kind of play around with that.
And we'll cover that hopefully in a couple months, I guess, when we start a
Yeah.
visual testing tool.
And this project is large, and I know that. So if Sven, you guys are interested in, you know, creating some sort of public project or something like that, I think that I'd be happy to, you know, maybe build this as the first step, because obviously there's a whole nother side of like the pipeline that I didn't even cover. You know what I mean? This is just like as much information as it was just getting started.
Right, we'll get some to be continued. I'm going to stop recording.
Yes. Thanks, Sven.